you've ever had a dominating, abusive, toxic, or alpha male type of figure in your life, whether it was your father, your brother, or a romantic partner, or maybe you yourself are a male and you've been told that you exhibit some of these qualities, then you definitely need to watch this video. So first and foremost, the number one reason that this even exists is because at one time, there was a societal and cultural need for this type of persona. For example, let's take it back to the cave people era. What we typically saw, because women were the ones that were able to bear children, they needed to stay home, they needed to stay protected, they were the more vulnerable gender. Then you have the males who were the ones going out, braving the elements, that were fighting for scarce resources, that needed that brawn and aggressive alpha persona that made other people become submissive, because that was the way that they would survive and advance. We can see this through different eras, through different generational times. Definitely in the cave people era, where we were out in the wilderness and it was very man eat man. And then next, going into, let's say, village times, especially for us South Asian folks, we are village dwelling humans. That's where our society originates from. So again, not a lot of safety and protection. It was very volatile, very hostile environments. So that type of bravado and aggressive personality was very needed. That's where kind of patriarchy comes from. Is then again, let's talk about war. Those were the people who were sent out because the women were the ones making society progress and bearing children. They weren't the ones going out and fighting wars back when the world did need to be populated. So it was men and their strength and their muscles and their brawn that was very needed and reinforced originally when there was a strong need for those strong gender roles. Then let's fast forward a little bit. Even with modernization, even with the times changing and people having office jobs and rather cushy lives and having migrated out of those third world countries, we still see lots of reinforcement, whether it's in society or culture, for that alpha male, the assertive, sometimes aggressive type of character traits being celebrated and seeing those people advance. Essentially, what you have is the original mold was created, and because it made everyone else fearful around them, it really allowed for that role or that archetype to just stay the way that it was. There wasn't enough of a push against that type of archetype to see it dissolve or to see that change through evolution. However, there are many problems with men being told not to cry and to repress their emotions and to have that type of outward appearance, all the while they're not wired to actually be masking everything that they are. So, like we mentioned, once the mold gets created and the ball gets rolling in a certain direction, unless there's like strong mass media influences or in the education system or some sort of overarching big systemic influence pushing things to go the other way, we're not going to see that whole alpha masculine type of stereotype for a man who little boys watch as, okay, that's the norm, that's the status quo, that's what I need to be like, change. So of course, what do we see in mass media? I mean, even I just watched the Superman movie last night, so it's like fresh in my head, but most men are expected to be superhuman. They're expected to work when nothing else works, push themselves to the brink, look a certain way in terms of their physique, shoulder all the emotions within the family while never really expressing or navigating their own or being shamed as children for expressing their own. This is very much perpetuated in movies, certain cultural groups, especially in the South Asian diaspora. Masculinity is in all our music. Essentially, when you have something feeding and reinforcing the way that the trajectory has been going, nothing's going to tip the scale the other way. So this is why sometimes we're seeing really strong reactions even on social media when women are trying to speak up about certain things like the toxic aspects of hypermasculinity, toxic masculinity, because they've at one point been shamed
for being vulnerable, for trying to express the vast array of emotions that they do in fact have. And then what ends up happening is repressed emotions will transform into anger. Thus you have the angry male, which we see a lot of, like the typical Punjabi angry male, also a very big stereotype perpetuated in Bollywood. Number 3, let's talk about patriarchal structures. So because of inheritance trends and norms, that land goes to the male offspring, inheritance goes to the male. A lot of times the male feels like he needs to protect this inheritance and make sure he has control and dominance over the females in his life in order to assure that that patriarchy and him being the head of the household or taking the reins over from his father being the head of the household stays enforced. They can find it to be an attack or an attempt to overthrow their patriarchal regime if they see a strong, assertive, powerful female, as is the norm in 2025, coming and potentially threatening what they feel is rightfully theirs. So again, then we're going to see them double down on that aggressive, assertive type of behavior. And like I mentioned previously, often the way that they exhibit and try to ascertain or attain that control is through force, whether it's through their hands, their words, their behaviors, their mentality. It's all very rigid and fixed. So let's say if you have parents telling you boys don't cry, you have the media telling you boys don't cry, you have historical constructs ingrained in you, it's in your genetics, it's in your DNA, then it's going to be really hard to break out against that mold and to be vulnerable, to express your emotions. And often it's especially reinforced by the peer group for males because safety is in numbers. We find that a validation, identity, and acceptance in that whole feeling that you belong, that you're accepted. And if the mold that you feel like you need to be accepted into is that hyper masculine, that very strong alpha energy, then your peers are going to give you pushback if you exhibit any behaviors of like expressing yourself or sharing your woes or trying to share your insecurities, your unmet needs, or your traumas. And then this gives you that big emotion of shame, and you're really going to pull it back in, and you're going to learn very quickly that it's not the right way to be as a man, quote unquote. Lastly, what all of this leads to is repressed trauma. And so usually when you have someone being abrasive, aggressive, sharing their types of ideals on what it means to be a true man, a traditional man in its masculine traditional sense, usually that's just repressed traumas, insecurities. The fact of the matter is they are wired to have the same amount of hurts and pains and wounds and emotions as females are. They just haven't had the luxury of being able to express it. Although all the causal factors have changed through time and as the generations have gone on, the environment and circumstances have evolved. However, the people haven't. So until we start to have these type of dialogues and understand like, hey, why are you so angry? What's under that anger? Why are you having such a fixed mindset? Why does anything that pokes at that trigger you in the way that it does, that you double down on your misogynistic ideals and patterns and behaviors? It's really important to be curious, analytical, and observative, and be able to zoom out and understand the whole big picture, historical, systemic, cultural, societal, in order to see some change. Because it's ultimately not a bad thing to have someone be vulnerable. You'll see less crime, you'll see less abuse, you'll see less family conflict. All in all, it's a win if men are able to develop that wherewithal and emotional landscape for themselves. What are your thoughts and feelings? Have you guys thought about any of this before? Do you think I missed any factors? Please comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings and get some dialogue going around this, since it is such a huge problem. And I didn't even touch upon the fact that they self-medicate with alcohol a lot of the time, which is why we have so much prevalent alcohol abuse in the community and culture, and even across all cultures, really. That's why men tend to try to suppress with a drink. So that's also a part of the dialogue and conversation as well. I gotta get going and run to a meeting now, but as usual, thank you for watching. See you next time.